I almost choked when my sister looked at my niece, smiled as if she were announcing the weather, and said, "One day this house will be yours." The words hit harder than the sip of water caught in my throat. Before I could recover, my mother turned toward me with a satisfied smile, the kind that only appears when someone believes a decision has already been settled, not discussed, not negotiated, settled. Sunlight spilled across the dining table, warming untouched plates while every familiar face suddenly felt unfamiliar. My niece giggled, too young to understand why every adult had gone strangely still. My brother-in-law lowered his eyes. My father studied his coffee cup as though it held instructions for escape. I set my glass down carefully. "Since when?" I asked, keeping my voice calm enough to make everyone lean in. "Did you start deciding who gets my house?" Silence swallowed the room. Not embarrassed silence. Exposed silence. The kind that arrives when a secret everyone has protected is dragged into daylight. My sister's smile trembled for only a second before she laughed, waving her hand as though I had misunderstood a harmless joke. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said. "We're just talking about the future." "The future?" I repeated. My fingers rested lightly against the oak table I had paid for myself. Inside the house, I had spent 12 years building payment by payment, overtime shift by overtime shift. Every brick carried memories they had never helped create. Every room represented sacrifices they had never witnessed. Yet somehow they were discussing my home like it had already become family property. Mother sighed loudly. "You don't have children," she said. "Naturally, the house should stay in the family." I looked at her, almost amused by the logic. "I am family," I replied. Nobody answered. Instead, they exchanged quick glances, small, nervous looks that told me something far more important than their words ever could. This conversation hadn't started today. I had simply walked into the middle of it. And in that quiet dining room, surrounded by people who smiled while dividing up a life that still belonged to me, I realized something chilling. They weren't asking for my house. In their minds, they had already taken it. My name is Daniel, and at 43, I had spent most of my life believing that quiet people were eventually understood. I wasn't the loud sibling, the demanding son, or the one who filled every room with opinions. I simply worked, paid my bills, and kept my promises, trusting that consistency spoke louder than attention ever could. My younger sister, Melissa, had always been the center of the family's orbit. If she needed money, someone found it. If she made a mistake, someone explained it away. When she married young and struggled financially, my parents called it bad luck. When I skipped vacations to cover my mortgage and build a stable life, they called it expected. Somewhere along the way, reliability stopped being appreciated and became something everyone quietly depended on. I never married, not because I feared commitment, but because life unfolded differently than I'd imagined. After my father suffered a serious health scare years earlier, I stayed close, helping with appointments, repairs, and whatever else needed doing. I never kept score. Family wasn't supposed to be transactional. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I dismissed. My mother referred to my house as the family home, even though every payment came from my account. Melissa would joke that her daughter already had a favorite bedroom, upstairs whenever they visited. Everyone laughed, including me, because challenging small assumptions felt unnecessary. What I failed to understand was that repeated assumptions eventually become expectations, and expectations left unchallenged long enough begin to sound like ownership. By the time I heard my sister promise my house to her daughter, I wasn't witnessing a careless comment. I was hearing the final line of a conversation that had been happening behind my back for years. After that lunch, I stopped dismissing the little moments that had once seemed harmless. They hadn't begun overnight. They had been collecting quietly, one assumption at a time, until they formed a picture I could no longer ignore. Melissa started referring to the guest room as Emma's room. Whenever she visited, she said it with an easy smile, brushing invisible dust from the dresser as though she already belonged there. Each time my mother nodded without correcting her, while my niece happily arranged stuffed animals on the bed, unaware of what those words really implied. Family dinners changed too. Conversations about my house unfolded as if I were merely another guest at the table. My mother wondered aloud where a nursery could fit later on. Melissa discussed repainting. The kitchen, because lighter colors make a home feel bigger. Neither of them ever looked at me while speaking. It was as though my opinion had become an inconvenient detail. I noticed the pauses whenever I entered a room unexpectedly. Voices softened. Subjects changed. My sister would exchange a quick glance with my mother before smiling, a little too brightly, and asking how work had been. The questions felt rehearsed, designed to steer me away from whatever had been discussed seconds earlier. Even my generosity became something they quietly expected. If a faucet leaked at my parents' house, I was called before a plumber. If Melissa needed money for school supplies or car repairs, everyone assumed I would help. Gratitude grew shorter each year until it disappeared altogether, replaced by casual confidence that I would simply say yes. The strange part wasn't the disrespect itself. It was how comfortable everyone had become with it. No one insulted me directly. No one raised their voice. They simply behaved as though my kindness had erased the boundary between what belonged to me and what belonged to them. And the calmer they acted, the more certain I became that they genuinely believed I would never challenge them. The moment that changed everything didn't happen during another family dinner. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I came home early after a canceled meeting. Melissa's car was parked in my driveway. That wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was the front door already unlocked. I stepped inside quietly and heard voices upstairs. My mother and Melissa were walking through the hallway, speaking with the casual certainty of people who believed they were alone. "This room would be perfect once Emma's older," Melissa said. Mother answered without hesitation, "Daniel won't mind. He never argues about these things." I stood at the bottom of the staircase, one hand resting on the banister, listening as they discussed my home room by room. They debated where furniture should go, which walls could be painted, and whether the office should become another bedroom. Not once did either of them speak as though I still owned the place. What hurt wasn't their confidence. It was the certainty behind it. They truly believed my silence meant permission. I walked upstairs and the conversation stopped the instant they saw me. Melissa forced a smile that arrived a second too late. My mother folded her arms, waiting for me to apologize for interrupting them in my own house. Instead, I simply asked, "How did you get inside?" Melissa held up the spare key. "You gave this to Mom years ago." She was right. I had given it to my mother for emergencies after my father's health scare, trusting it would only be used if I needed help. Somewhere along the way, emergency had quietly become whenever we feel like it. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just held out my hand. The key. They stared at me for several long seconds, before my mother reluctantly placed it in my palm. That tiny piece of metal barely weighed anything. Yet as I closed my fingers around it, I realized I wasn't taking back a key. I was taking back the first boundary I should have protected years earlier. From that moment on, I stopped hoping my family would remember that the house was mine. I decided I would remind them with actions, not arguments. I didn't announce my decision to anyone. Experience had taught me that people who underestimate, you rarely notice you're moving until you've already finished. The morning after I took back the spare key, I made a checklist. Not an emotional one, a practical one. I reviewed every document connected to the house: the deed, insurance policy, mortgage records, utility accounts, and security information. Everything was exactly as it should have been. My name appeared on every page. Every payment had come from my bank account since the day I signed the purchase agreement. There wasn't a single legal question about ownership. Still, assumptions have a strange way of surviving facts unless the facts are organized. I scheduled a meeting with an estate attorney, not because anyone had a claim to my home, but because I wanted every future decision documented properly. We reviewed my estate plan, updated my will, and discussed durable powers of attorney and medical directives. The process wasn't dramatic. It was simply responsible. When I left the office, every important document reflected one principle: my property would be distributed according to my wishes, not someone else's expectations. Next, I replaced every exterior lock and upgraded the security system. I changed alarm codes, updated emergency contacts, and disabled every old access code that had accumulated over the years. I never mentioned it to my family. If they discovered the changes, it would only be because they expected access they no longer had. The final step was the quietest. I accepted a promotion at work that required occasional travel, an opportunity I had postponed for years because I was always available whenever my family needed something. This time, I said yes without asking anyone's opinion. For the first time in years, my schedule revolved around my own life instead of theirs. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was removing the privileges they had mistaken for permanent rights. And I had a feeling they wouldn't notice the difference until they reached for something they assumed would always be there, and found nothing waiting for them. The payoff arrived without a confrontation. About 3 weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was finishing a meeting. Melissa. I let it ring once before answering. Daniel, she said, trying to sound casual. We stopped by your house, but Mom's key wouldn't work. I looked out the office window at the rain sliding down the glass. It isn't supposed to. A long pause followed. You changed the locks? Yes. Another silence. Longer this time. Why would you do that without telling us? I smiled, though no one could see it. Because no one told me my house had become open to family tours. She didn't answer. That evening, my mother called. Her voice carried the quiet disappointment she had always used when she expected guilt to do the work that reason couldn't. You embarrassed your sister. No, I replied evenly. I established a boundary. She sighed. We're family. I know. Nothing more. No argument. No raised voices. Just the uncomfortable weight of words that could no longer be ignored. The real consequence arrived at the next family gathering. When everyone settled around the table, Melissa instinctively began talking about future holidays at my house. She stopped halfway through the sentence, glanced at me, then looked away. No one finished the thought. For the first time, every conversation about my home included a simple question. Would that be okay with you? It was a small change, almost invisible to anyone. Outside the family? But I noticed it immediately. People who had once spoken over me now waited for my answer. My silence no longer meant agreement. It meant they didn't know what I was thinking, and that uncertainty forced them to respect limits they had ignored for years. I never reminded them of the locked door. I didn't need to. Every time they reached for permission instead of assumption, they remembered it themselves. And somehow, that quiet shift accomplished more than any dramatic argument ever could. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No one apologized outright. Families rarely do when an apology would require admitting years of comfortable entitlement. Instead, the changes appeared in small, almost invisible ways. Melissa stopped referring to my house as though it belonged to all of us. My mother called before visiting instead of announcing she was dropping by. Even my father, who had spent years avoiding conflict, began asking my opinion instead of assuming he already knew it. There were consequences, of course. I wasn't invited to every last-minute family gathering anymore. Conversations occasionally paused when I entered the room. For a while, I became the relative who had changed. I let them believe that if it made the adjustment easier, the truth was simpler. I hadn't changed at all. I had only stopped making myself smaller to keep everyone else comfortable. Something unexpected happened after that. Friends and co-workers noticed a difference before my family did. I said no without explaining myself. I stopped rearranging my schedule to solve problems that weren't mine. The constant feeling of responsibility for everyone else's happiness quietly disappeared, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Looking back, I realized the story was never really about a house. The house was only the symbol. What was truly at stake was the dangerous belief that kindness is the same as surrender. It isn't. Kindness is a choice. Surrender happens when other people start making your choices for you. That's why this matters. Most betrayals don't begin with dramatic lies or stolen fortunes. They begin with tiny assumptions that go unchallenged until someone else starts writing the future of your life without ever asking your permission. The day I took back my key, I wasn't protecting a building. I was protecting the quiet certainty that my life and every decision about it still belonged to me. A year has passed since that afternoon at the dining table, and the house feels different now. Not because the walls changed, because I did. For the first time since I bought it, the silence inside these rooms belongs entirely to me. It isn't filled with unspoken expectations or invisible obligations. It's simply home again. My relationship with my family survived, but it found a healthier shape. We still celebrate birthdays together. I still laugh with my niece, who never deserved to be caught in the middle of adult assumptions. Melissa eventually stopped treating every disagreement as a personal rejection. My mother still slips into old habits now and then, but she catches herself more often than not. Respect didn't arrive all at once. It arrived one conversation, one phone call, one request for permission at a time. The biggest surprise was discovering how much energy I had spent protecting everyone else's comfort while neglecting my own. Once I stopped carrying that weight, I found room for things I'd postponed for years. I traveled. I renovated the office into the reading room I'd always wanted. I hosted friends because I wanted to, not because I felt obligated to keep peace. People sometimes imagine revenge as a dramatic moment that leaves everyone else defeated. They couldn't be more wrong. The most satisfying revenge is living so confidently within your own boundaries that the people who ignored them have no choice but to acknowledge them. No speeches, no humiliation, just quiet consistency. I no longer wonder who will inherit my house. That decision is written down, protected, and known only to the people who need to know. The rest is nobody's business until I decide otherwise. Looking back, I don't remember the silence that followed my question at the dinner table. I remember what came after it. The moment I realized that respect isn't something you beg your family to give you. It's something you teach them by refusing to surrender what is already yours. And sometimes, the strongest door you'll ever close is the one you never should have left open in the first place.